I want to talk about the two most common effects that may be useful to you in a live setting: reverb and compression. What is reverb? To reverberate simply means that a sound will be repeated several times through overlapping echoes. Reverberation is the persistence of sound after a sound is produced. Reverb is created when sound waves bounce around, causing a large number of reflections to build up and then decay as the sound is absorbed by the surfaces of the objects in the space. Reverb, whether it's on a mixing board, a standalone hardware unit, or a plug-in on a digital audio workstation, uses DSP, or digital signal processing, to emulate a room or sonic space by creating a series of naturally decaying repeats of the audio signal. Remember that every room has a composite sound, and this can be attributed to its unique characteristics. For instance, a small bathroom will sound different than a large gymnasium, but they all have natural reverberation, which is to say that a sound will reflect off the surfaces of each room. If you're in a big room with lots of reflective surfaces, it may be a good idea to let the room do its thing. Sometimes we don't need any additional reverb. Just because we have it doesn't mean we need to use it. I may, for example, use a touch of reverb on the vocals and leave it at that. I always encourage the use of natural reverb because it's more familiar to our ears than digital emulation. Let's say you have carpet and sound panels on the walls of a small, dry room. You may want to add some reverb to the mix to give the illusion that the space is bigger than it actually is. It may also help to blend the instruments together. However, if you decide to use reverb, I encourage you to make it subtle and inconspicuous at first. Many of the digital reverbs these days have presets, so it's a good idea to start with a preset that sounds good to you. A preset is a collection of parameters whose settings are saved on the reverb unit. Thusly, they can be loaded at will. Presets can also be a great way to learn about how to set various parameters. Let's take a look at a few different reverb plugins and a few of their presets. Here we have different reverb plugins, and each one works a little differently. I've selected a few presets so we can analyze some of the parameters. First, we have Lost in Bathroom on the Averb. Notice how we have 0 milliseconds pre-delay time, we have 75% decay time, 70% mix. Now let's go down to the Silververb and look at the Hall preset. We have 20 milliseconds pre-delay, 100% on the time. I really like the EQ here, but we only have 34% mix as opposed to the 70% on the Averb. Now let's look at the Goldverb preset Warm Gym. We have a few milliseconds of pre-delay, 3.3 seconds of reverb time, and 40% in the mix. Now let's look at the Church preset in the Platinum Verb. We have a whopping 6 seconds of reverb time, 50% in the mix, and a very small amount of pre-delay or initial delay. On the Space Designer reverb, I've selected a large choir hall. We have 2.229 seconds of reverb, 0 pre-delay. Our EQ graph here is flat. Presets can be a great way to learn how the manufacturers set the parameters for various room emulations. Let's look at the 3 parameters that I often adjust on a reverb unit: the pre-delay, the decay time, and the EQ of the reverb, which sometimes appear as high and or low frequency dampening. Pre-delay, or initial delay, is the amount of time that passes before the audio signal hits the walls of the room. As you can see, a little time goes by before the sound reflects off the walls. And notice how in most real rooms, the high frequencies will decay faster than the low frequencies. This is important to keep in mind when we set our EQ for the reverb. The pre-delay of a bathroom will be much shorter than that of a gymnasium, since it will take a longer period of time for the sound to reach the walls of a gymnasium. If we have 0 pre-delay time, this may affect the tone of the voice or an instrument, since the reverb will go to work on the sound immediately. You may want that. Actually, a lot of the time I do. If you don't want that, then slightly increase the pre-delay time. For example, some engineers prefer about 50 milliseconds of pre-delay on the vocals so that the sibilance of the lyrics remains intact, untouched by the reverb. My personal setting for decay time is 2 seconds, give or take a quarter second. So I'll start with 1.75 seconds and then increase the decay time until the reverb is audible. That may seem arbitrary now, but as you familiarize yourself with these parameters, it'll be a good place to start when you need to adjust your decay time. I'm usually trying to be inconspicuous with the reverb, so if I have too much decay time, it may decrease the clarity of the mix by blurring everything together too much. The overall mix may suffer from a loss of clarity and focus. I always encourage people to be subtle at first. There's no right or wrong on this. Reverb is an imperfect art, so you need to use your ears and figure out what sounds good to you. But I seldom go beyond 2.25 seconds in a live setting. When it comes to EQ, I typically roll off the highs using a high frequency shelf, and I'll set the frequency somewhere near 5,000 Hertz. Remember that high frequencies naturally decay faster in a room, so we want to emulate this by rolling off the highs. I also use a low frequency shelf and roll off the lows somewhere between 300 Hertz and 500 Hertz. I found that reverb in the low end can make a mix sound muddy. Reverb can help to gel or smooth out a mix by blending together audio signals of some of the channels on the mixing board at varying amounts into the same sonic space. Use your ears to find the right balance of the most natural reverb sound in the mix. Remember that less is more, so start out by applying a small amount to anything that sounds dry or upfront in the mix, such as the vocals. Now let's talk about compression. The main purpose of compression is to decrease the peaks in the audio signal, resulting in less dynamic contrast. Compression is used to attenuate a portion of the audio signal that crosses over and above a predetermined threshold. Let's say you have a singer that's belting out the national anthem. Well, as we venture further into the melody of the song, it tends to get louder as energy builds and as the melody goes into a higher register of the vocal range. An experienced singer will back off of the mic to adjust for this increase in their volume, but a less experienced singer may need the help of a compressor. This may get technical for a moment, so please bear with me. I want to talk about a few common parameters that are found on most compressors. First, we determine the point at which the compressor begins to work via the threshold setting. If I have a setting of 0 dB, then the audio signal remains untouched by the compressor. As I bring the threshold down, we'll see some gain reduction here on our gain reduction meter. This meter shows me that the compressor is now working. The amount of gain reduction is determined by the ratio setting. Common ratio settings are 1.5 to 1 or 3 to 1 at the mild end and 12 to 1 or 15 to 1 at the more extreme end. In a ratio of 3 to 1 for every 3 dB by which the input signal exceeds the threshold, only 1 dB will be allowed to pass by the compressor. I generally use relatively quick attack times and slow release times, but compression is another art form unto itself. So I encourage you to seek out additional resources if you'd like to learn more about compression techniques.